right, we're live on YouTube. This is the Complete Man Podcast, episode number 19, and we're live in 3, 2. All right, welcome back to the Complete Man Podcast with your host, Purdeep Sangha, the Complete Man himself. How you doing today, Purdeep?
Hey, I'm Nathan. I'm doing awesome, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, man. I recently had a pretty rough breakup with a girl that I was seeing, so that was kind of a bummer, but other than that, I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty awesome, man. I'm a little bit sad too because you're breaking up with me as well. It seems like we're gonna be doing this podcast without you in the next couple of months.
Yeah, so unfortunately, my love life is not going great, but my business life is going phenomenal, and it's just uh, podcast. Okay, people do not appreciate, I think, how difficult or how time consuming creating, editing, publishing podcast work is.
Yeah, it takes a lot of work, right? It's not a 5-minute process, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So, some things coming to an end. Hopefully, things coming to new beginnings. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, cool. Well, I wish you the best of luck. So, for those of you out there listening, you may not hear Nathan's voice here in the new year, 2023. But don't worry, we'll still make this podcast awesome. We'll have to find a Nathan wannabe because I like having Nathan around. Nathan's an awesome co-host, so we're gonna miss you, Nathan.
There's lots of Nathan wannabes out there, just so you know. So,
Awesome. So yeah, you were talking about your relationship. What happened?
oh man. Okay, so I think a lot of things I've been reflecting on this for the last couple of weeks, and it was, I guess, a chance to learn some things about myself that maybe I hadn't addressed before. But a couple things happened, and I noticed some things about myself, and I kind of wanted to pick your brain about a few of the things. The first and foremost is I feel like in business, I have a lot of confidence in myself. I can close high ticket sales. I can deliver for my clients. I feel confident setting healthy boundaries. In personal relationships, though, I do not have that same level of confidence. And in this last relationship that I was in, I realized that I had kind of a fear of abandonment that maybe goes back to not feeling good enough when, my personal information, my real dad, I never met him. He left before I was born. My mom suffered from her own issues and was constantly making me feel like I was going to be kicked out of the tribe. And at 13 years old, I actually was kicked out, and 15 years old, again, kicked out and living on my own. And so I have like these abandonment issues, probably with women. Yeah, and I had this thing come up a couple times where the girl I was seeing would push me away, and my instinct was to just be like, okay, I'm out of here. Just a little bit of rough waters, and I'm off this boat. I'm leaving. And man, I realized how unhealthy of a response that was. Yeah, so that was probably the biggest thing, and so I did want to talk to you about why is it so easy for me to have confidence in client relationships, but not to have that same confidence in interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, and I first of all I want to thank you for being brave enough to actually talk about this because talking about relationships isn't easy, especially for us guys. It's a little bit easier for women, but for guys, when our relationship isn't going well, it impacts us just as much as it impacts women, but we just don't like to talk about it as much.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of that is because we don't have the resources, and we're just not as social, you can say, as women are when it comes to opening up our kimono. So thanks for being open to share that information. I think one of the other things too, Nathan, and I'm not a therapist. I want to put that disclaimer out there. By no means am I a therapist. One of the things I talked to you about was find a good therapist. Not that there's something wrong with you, but therapists, their main role is to help you uncover things that you may not be able to uncover yourself and give you strategies to actually deal with them. That's more important. Like, how do you actually, yeah, you could talk about your past, but how do you actually overcome it and how do you actually move forward? That is what's way more important. And so it's important to find someone that actually has that skill set. Um, but when it comes to relationships, you talked about abandonment issues. There's different kinds of attachment styles, for example, that we all have. But I don't think a lot of the audience, Nathan, appreciates where you came from in life, because it's not just that you had these experiences with your family members. You've also lost key members of your family. And so for maybe you can, I don't want to dig up the past, but I think it's important for context for the audience to understand you've been through some major challenges.
Yeah, I mean, most of it is pretty healed. It was about 10 years ago. I had a crazy stint within a single year span. My brother drank himself to death, had kidney and liver failure from partying way too hard. My dad caught hepatitis B, I think, from sharing needles. He was a heroin addict. And then my mom was one of the many victims, I guess, of the opioid epidemic. I don't know if it's the same in Canada, but we had out of control pharmaceutical companies that just were overprescribing opioids for years here in America. And that ended up being something that my mom got hooked on. And so she ended up passing away very early as well. All within a year, I lost my mom, my dad, and my brother through different, some legal and some not legal addictions. So it was a rough year for sure.
Man, and one of the things that I learned, I can't even imagine what you went through. Like that in itself is incredible, and you're here, right? And you're thriving. One of the things that I learned just from some of my therapist friends is that most of us human beings have gone through some traumatic experiences. And when they use that word trauma, you know, I was thinking, some kind of abuse. I was thinking maybe physical, emotional, sexual abuse or whatever it was. But when you're younger, even up until you're in your 20s, any type of event that has a big emotional impact on you can be considered a traumatic event. And that definition actually really changed my approach, because I was like, holy crow, how many people have actually gone through traumatic events? And for you, that 1 year is or was a traumatic event, a, a massive traumatic event, right? And all of these things have an impact, especially when we're younger. Even having our parents, I remember my dad, I was not acting good. He gave me a warning, and then I don't know how old I was, maybe 12 or something. He he kicked me out of the house when he just put me outside, locked the door, and said, "You're not coming back in." I just remember sitting there just bawling and being like freaked out. I can't imagine what you went through, right? Going through that experience, but that was a traumatic event. So for you, you've gone through these series, and a therapist can actually help you uncover and deal with these. And I know a lot of us say, "Hey, look, we're healed," but I'm guessing that there's stuff still underneath there that needs to be healed even deeper. But when it comes back to this woman, and you were saying you were basically, we all have this instinct, right? Fight or flight, right? Or freeze. And yours is flight, it sounds like, when you get into a tough spot with someone in your relationship.
It's flight or freeze. It's rarely fight because I just don't like the conflict.
Yeah, so you're not engaging. Essentially, that's what it is, right? It's an avoidance style.
Yeah, and
Um,
I used to think that was stoic. I was like, oh man, I just don't show my emotions because I'm stoic. Now I'm like, oh, it's probably not the healthiest way to handle conflict.
yeah. Well, yeah, there's different conflict styles. That's another one. Attachment styles, conflict styles. Those are two things I highly encourage you and everybody out there to look up. But it's interesting you talk about being stoic. Stoic is managing your emotions but still engaging, right? In a moral, ethical, value principled way, that it really creates a positive situation rather than a lose situation. So engaging is important, and that's why they say in relationships, when you start to disengage, the relationship is not going in the right direction. So it sounds like it was easier for you to just say goodbye than it was to actually deal with it. And why is that?
Um, I think the biggest thing that I realized about myself is that I am not. I'm kind of illiterate when it comes to emotions. So there was times where she would ask me like, "Well, why did you do this? Why were what were you feeling that made you do this?" And it took me 2 or 3 days of like thinking about it to be like, why did I do that? Why did I act that way? Why did I respond that way? What was I feeling? And I don't have like the emotional tool belt. I'm not quick at identifying this is how I'm feeling. This is why I'm feeling this way. And if I can't do it for myself, it's even harder for me to say, well, why is she feeling this way? Why is this other person responding like this? What's going on inside of them? So I have trouble identifying my own emotions, my own feelings about things, and then definitely have trouble identifying and reading other people's emotions sometimes. And so I think just lacking, it's something I haven't really developed in myself as again, going back to the guys don't show emotions thing that we're all kind of raised with. I guess there is some truth to some of the toxic masculinity tropes out there.
Yeah, I'm going to stop you right there before we get too much into that toxic masculinity, because it's a lot of it is not being educated. Because the first question that you asked is, or the topic that you talked about was the confidence piece,
Mm-hmm.
right? And acknowledging that is huge. So a lot of us guys don't have confidence in our relationships, and here's why: confidence has a lot to do with competence. There's a direct correlation,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how do you get what is competence? Competence is basically improving your skills and abilities, your knowledge, skills, and abilities, right? So, this is one conversation I have with a lot of people. Being in a successful relationship is a skill. It's not a natural thing that just happens. I've heard a lot of people say, well, if you're with the right person, things should just be easy. It should just fall into place. That's not how it works. In fact, it's a complete opposite. You need to be able to get through those challenges, and you need to learn that skill and have the knowledge behind that. So picking up books and reading and even doing courses on relationships is what I recommend to every single person, not just guys. Because once you build your knowledge, you're going to have more competence, because you're going to be able to deal with things more effectively. So that's the first thing. Most of us are incompetent in relationships because we don't have the knowledge and information. But yeah, it's not just you, it's everybody. They don't teach us that. We need to build their skill. One book I would recommend for everybody out there is called Fall in Love, Stay in Love. It's by Willard Harley. It's one of the books that I first read when I broke up, was in a breakup with my first love, you can say, and I was shattered. And I went on this 3-year spree to figure out why the heck our relationship went down this place, because I was just not myself after that. And I reached out to this gentleman who is one of the top psychologists in this field of relationship counseling, and he has a series of amazing books. So I highly recommend Fall in Love and Stay in Love, by Willard Harley. I called him, his nickname was Bill, but highly recommend that book to everybody. And here's how I relate to relationships. And this is kind of the analogy that we use, Nathan, when my wife and I talk about our relationship. It's two people in a dance, right? And in that dance, and this is where, we talk, I talk about it from a traditional perspective. Traditionally in dance, the man leads, right, and the woman kind of follows and kind of adds to it. So I'm gonna use that approach. So you're in this dance together. You are two separate human beings that are in this dance, and you have to be in sync to make that dance work. And that synchronization requires you to do two things. A, you need to practice as a team, right? You need to get onto that dance floor and practice as a team, so you can understand each other's movements and know how to react appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
And that requires practice and skill. And we don't necessarily do that as people in relationships. We don't practice. What we do is just go straight in, right? We go straight into the competition, and we don't have that practice. And unfortunately, it's that practice that makes us better. So that practice could be something simple as going through books, going through mock scenarios and saying, if this happened, how would you react to that? and maybe this is how I would react to that. There's some really good books out there for that. So practice is important. And then understanding that you two are individuals, separate individuals, and you need to practice on your own. You need to build your own skill set and competency, because again, the way my wife and I talk about it is and she can relate to it because she used to salsa dance a lot. And when I talk to her, I say, you know what, both of you have to build your own strength, right? Both of you have to, as a man and a woman. When I say you, I was referring to her because she would be dancing with someone else prior to me being in the picture, right? So the guy would have to be strong enough to hold his weight, and the woman would have to be strong enough to do her end. And that requires them practicing on their own. And that's something that we need to work on. As you talked about this, you as an individual need to work on your stuff. Mm-hmm. Right? And whoever you are with needs to work on their stuff independently. And then you got to work together as a couple on your stuff as a group. So there's this, what I call the trifecta approach for a relationship. And it sounds like maybe it was a little bit too late for you guys to work on that, or you guys were working on one part, but maybe not all the parts.
I will say, and I don't want to throw her under the bus and be like, well, she did this and blah, 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 blah. I was not 100% responsible for the unhealthy attachment issues that kind of led to the breakup. I definitely was 50% of it, but yeah, it was, and maybe that's also, I was thinking about it and kind of like looking into things, and the type of people that I usually attract, the type of people that I'm usually attracted to, it's kind of like this, oh, this person's broken just like me. And so if I can, help them, whatever, maybe they'll love me enough not to reject me. And so, yeah, I will say that, I guess part of it was my fault, and the other part of it, I'll take responsibility for the fact that I attracted and had a track record of attracting certain type of people into my life.
Interesting. Maybe we'll get into that here in a little bit. But, this is something that's important to talk about, because a lot of people think, oh, yeah, you know what? One person should take accountability for the entire relationship. That's a bunch of BS. Just like a dance, but it requires both people, right? If you're sitting there and you're lifting your partner up and swinging her around, and she's completely limp and she's not doing her own part, it's going to make your part even more difficult, right? And eventually you're going to drop her. And so that's what happens in a relationship. It literally requires two people to make it work. And it can take one person to not make it work. That is the reality. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't take accountability for your part, and maybe even her part, because she's reacting to some of the stuff that you're doing as well. But I think the guilt factor is what hurts a lot of us, because that's what hurt me the first time around. And I took on her stuff, and that wasn't healthy, because I was like, I could have been better at this and I could have been better at that. And then it took me a while through therapy to say, no, that's not healthy. That's her. She needs to own that. So have you done that yet?
Yeah, I went through that exact same thought process of beating myself up and taking soul. How could I screw this up, through the last couple of weeks, being like, oh, you know what? I actually didn't deserve this type of treatment. And even though maybe I didn't respond to it properly, that was not a healthy situation for me to be putting myself into. So, again, though, I don't want to throw anybody else under the bus or be like, she did this and blah, 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 blah. But definitely I don't carry all of the guilt for it, and I'm not beating myself up about it anymore.
Yeah, you don't have to throw her under the bus. You can just throw her in front of a bike. How's that? Right? A little bit of a softer approach. But what did you learn as a result of this, and what do you think is still out there that you need to work on?
I learned that I need to develop my skill set with identifying my emotions. And I learned that I need to be better at, when things do bother me, bringing them up and not starting a fight about it, and not not letting them boil up until the point where I explode. I don't usually explode. I'm usually a pretty easygoing guy about things, but I do sometimes worry that if I bring up something that does bother me, that this person's gonna be like, okay, well then you can leave, because I have experienced that type of response in the past.
Mm.
And then I also learned that I need to have a partner that also understands the value of not holding on to things until they explode, communicating things in a healthy way, not being afraid to communicate things, not I will say the one thing that I will say about this last relationship and a lot of relationships is, um, when you do something and the person doesn't tell you that it bothers them until weeks later, when they blow up, and then they tell you all the things over the last month that you've done that bothered them, it's very insecure. It makes you feel like, okay, now I don't have security in this relationship anymore. So
Mm.
I have realized that also when picking out a partner, I need to make sure that if I'm committing to somebody, it's somebody who doesn't do that to me, because I try not to do that to other people. So that was one of the things where I was like, okay, I deserve to not have um, this feeling of when things blow up, I feel like I'm walking through a minefield with a blindfold on, and I don't want to put myself in that situation anymore.
Man, you had so many like gold nuggets there. That was awesome because I think there's so many guys out there that can take stuff away from that and actually apply it to their own lives. So thank you for sharing that. That is so important. And it's really interesting because there's a couple of things I want to comment on there. First of all, is when we get into a new relationship, rarely do we actually see and test out that person's relationship skills
Mhm.
and see where they're at, right? Because everybody's at their best behavior. But that's one of the key important things to do, is not to purposely sabotage things, but to find out how this person deals with difficult situations. Do they hold on to stuff and harbor it and then just release it all at once months later? And maybe asking questions about that is important because it's easier to find out a person's relationship style earlier on and avoid a lot of the headaches or learn how to deal with it than later on. That becomes a lot tougher, right? That's why a lot of marriages fail, is because they haven't revealed, each person has not revealed how they deal with tough situations.
Mhm.
And that doesn't go well after, because now they don't have any experience in dealing with the tough situations with each other and things blow up. The second is, I want to ask you, how did that impact when you were going through those tough situations in your relationship? How did that impact your business?
I will say it knocked me off of my square for a little bit. It distracted my focus for about 2 weeks. Um, Fortunately, I love the work that I get to do. So it was kind of like, well, if this part of my life is going crappy, at least I still have this other part that's going pretty good. So it didn't throw it off as bad as it could have. But it's one of those things where in life, sometimes when one part of your life starts to wobble, it can resonate into other parts of your life. And it definitely did. But um, I learned a lot of lessons from working with you through the whole Corona thing, and realizing, okay, there's certain things you can control, there's certain things you can't control, and don't let the things that you can't control screw up the things that you can control. And throughout this whole thing, I was like, okay, business and my relationship with my daughter and her mom, and my friendships, those are the things that I do still have control over. So don't let this thing that you lost control over resonate into those other areas of life. So I did my best not to let it kind of seep into the other areas.
Yeah, that's smart, man. I love it because you just talked about that. It's one of the core concepts of a complete man, right? Having completeness in all areas of your life. So if one situation is not working out well, the other ones still keep you going and you still have momentum. I see this with men who are lopsided. They might have a killer business, but when the relationship isn't going well, they feel like crap, or vice versa. It's like you gotta have good things happening in different areas of your life so that they can build on each other just in case one goes down. It's like a diversification of your portfolio. You wouldn't put all your money in one basket. The same thing in your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And each feeds off each other and you get stronger and stronger in each of the areas. The other thing too is, when we're in business, I see a lot of guys, when things aren't going right at home, they'll either do two things: their business will tank, or they'll put all their time and effort into the business and the business will grow. And so there's different types of styles that guys go into. But here's the one thing that we don't realize is that when we are at work, what typically tends up happening, and Nathan, this may or may not have happened with you, but our brain goes into default mode network, which is a daydreaming network, about 47 to 50% of the day. And what ends up happening is when we are at work and it goes into that daydreaming, guess where it tends to go to? It goes to that crappy fight that you had with your spouse.
Hmm.
So even though we don't realize it or may not consciously realize it, but our brain is prone to that. It always will go back to that problem, the biggest problem in our life. So it is impacting our business,
Hmm.
regardless of whether we think it is or not, because that's how our brain is designed.
Hmm. So we're almost out of time. I do want to just say one more thank you to you, though. Meditation, man. Over the last like month, 3 weeks since this happened, 2 weeks, I don't know. Meditating every day and just being present, listening to the birds and feeling the warmth of the air and just being present in the moment. And every time my mind would start to slip to that daydream, being like, nope, that's 2 weeks ago. Can't do anything about it. You're here. You're right now. This is what's real. And stop neglecting what's real right now for what's just a memory. And had to work through it, had to not just ignore it, but man, meditation has been like one of the main key things to helping me get through this as well. And I don't think I would have ever picked meditation up if it wasn't for the fact that I worked with you and you kind of got me into it. So thank you for that as well.
Oh man, my pleasure. What a beautiful share in terms of your attitude towards it. That is awesome, and you will find that special somebody. And things happen for a reason, as we've talked about before, and you will. And I hope those of you out there listening got excuse me, a whole bunch of value from Nathan sharing what he did. So thank you, Nathan, because I think you've helped a lot of guys tuning into this podcast here.
For sure. And if people want to check out more episodes of the podcast, where's the best place to go?
Yeah, check out YouTubeformen.com. Actually, we're doing a big push on YouTubeformen.com. We never really did that as much before. We are actively promoting it, and it's actually growing quite fast. So check out YouTubeformen.com.
All right, man. And until next time, we will catch you later.
Till next time.